full mobility there of the torso area. Ball joint here at the
Justice.
Batman Arkham Origins is often considered the underdog of the entire series, considering it's not made by Rocksteady, but instead Warner Brothers Montreal. I feel like the actual design of our core hero here, very young in his Batman career, 2 years to be exact, is kind of in a similar position, and DC Collectibles decided to give us a new take on this version of Batman, and quite frankly, all these years later, minus one very glaring issue, I'd say he's actually one of the standouts from a visual standpoint. Here he is from DC Collectibles in the 6-inch scale, and the thing is that his costume in Arkham Origins, it's a little basic for Batman. You know what I'm saying? Like in terms of design, in terms of the padding and the color scheme and the overall look, it could be considered somewhat quote-unquote generic, but there's some form of personality still managing to seep on through with how Bruce is tackling his tactical suit here, because he's supposed to be a brand new Batman on the scene of Gotham after only just being Batman for 2 years. And being that he's still filled with that rage without any proper sense of wisdom or direction, he's still fighting with Alfred, etc. That's reflected in the suit, and I feel like DC Collectibles was able to harmonize on that with the scaling and the sculpt going on here, especially around the chest and shoulder area with the pads. Nothing is really separated, nothing's really elaborate, but that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be more robust, very brutish, and that's kind of what's coming across with the plastic pieces. They're very thick, very durable in the sense that, hey, there's hardness here, there's cold, there's nothing to really show us off that there's any kind of personality, especially when it comes to color detailing. It's literally just gray and black, and different shades of gray at that. And because of that, that's kind of the point. And I feel like DC Collectibles was able to really nail it across almost all the way across the board with the suit, especially the bat symbol in the center, the legs with the padding. Again, he's got those thick watermelon crushing legs. All I'm gonna say is that I wouldn't mind if Batman went all Famke Jensen on me. I mean, look at him right here. I will say that in figure form though, the shins do look a little weird. I mean, from a design standpoint, they don't look bad. I just feel like sculpting was a little strange with the legs, at least with this version that I got, where he's looking just a tad bit bow-legged, and from time to time that does make him a little difficult to stand, especially since as time went on, the looseness in the joints for the ankles got a little bit more predominant, and it gets a little difficult from time to time to get him to stand, especially because of, again, just how hulking massive he is really at the top side here with the shoulders, the chest area. But at least, as like I said, the sculpting is, in my opinion, one of my favorites coming out of DC Collectibles, especially with the way that the gauntlets are done and the shins are done. Again, very basic, nothing very flashy, but that's kind of the point with this take on the character. As you can see, the utility belt is no different. It's just very standard. Just, you know, looks like it's clipped there in the center with your basic color scheme and molding, but that's kind of, like I said, seeping through the personality of this younger Batman. And moving on up, we get to what is arguably my favorite part of this whole suit, is the cowl. There's something going on with the sculpting of this cowl and the glaring look and how angry he legitimately looks in this framing that it's just perfect for the Arkham Origins version. Now, I will say that this is probably the only little area as far as paint job is concerned that DC Collectible did flop a little bit, and that is the quote-unquote stubble they tried to kind of emulate here on his chin and his mouth, because in the game, being that, like I said, he is relatively new to being Batman, he has a little bit of a stubble going on. He's supposed to be dark and gruff and depressed, but I feel like that didn't translate very well when it came to paint job on the DC Collectible, because it looks a little too much like dirt, and my subconscious keeps wanting to wipe it off, only to then learn that that was the intention, is to simulate stubble, and it just didn't pan out 100%. Likewise, we could have maybe used a little bit of added detailing on the cape itself. Granted, you could also argue that this is another embodiment of his personality as Batman in his early years, because this is a much more straightforward cape. There's nothing terribly elaborate going on. There's no significant creases or detail or lifelike kind of attributes to make the cape kind of come alive. He's got the basic attributes there towards the bottom of the cape to resemble that of Batman, with the little cutouts there and the little curvatures. But aside from that, it's just a very straightforward rubber cape, so nothing to really write home about. And other than that, he just looks awesome. Like this, having him up on the shelf like this next to either my McFarlane versions of Arkham Asylum Batmans or the DC Collectibles, he stands out. Unfortunately, I feel like DC Collectibles did take one aspect of him being so young and being Batman a little too close to heart, in the sake that maybe he wasn't relying on his accessories too much, because this guy does not come with a single accessory. In fact, at one point I thought that maybe I just lost them, only for recently to then go online, recap, and find out, yeah, he really didn't come with any, and DC Collectibles decided to omit accessories on this guy altogether. And postability is pretty standard from what you'd expect from DC Collectibles. Now, let me take this time to say that please, if you do have this figure as of the watching of this video, and you have not touched it for a while, please be careful. This is, honest to God, my third take making this video, because this elbow joint right here has broken twice. The first time was off of a very simple articulation check, trying to not even move the elbow. I was trying to move the shoulder, and my finger got caught in his little gauntlets over here, ball joint here at the
hockey pads,
and it came off just like that, like barely any force, just like that. And so I super glued it, except I did the mistake, or at least what is now what I consider a mistake, to super glue it only in the section where the joint connects, not the entire segment here, this entire cup of the elbow joint. And in doing so, I shot a second take trying to move the arm, but he's just burning to actually extract vengeance upon Gotham City. Oh my
justice
God, a second time! And once again, it just came right off. And I was at the point to giving it the 3-strike rule and making this my final swing at trying to review this goddamn figure. And hopefully I did a better job at super gluing the arm, because I did in fact put glue all over the cup, not just the segment where the joint connects, but the entire thing. So this arm is completely stagnated. We're not touching it, we're not moving it, but ideally we can kind of get the point with the other arm, assuming it doesn't break. So if you do have this figure, please be careful with it, because upon doing a little bit of Charlie Day investigation, not only did I find my own personal Pepe Silvia, but it looks like this might not have been an isolated incident. It might be a widespread issue. I took to Reddit and I found out through a subreddit that a lot of other people have had this issue. Maybe not specifically with this arm, but with another arm or limb where it's coming apart after having this figure for so many years. And we're not really doing anything crazy with the figure, just bending it at its basic points of articulation, only for them to just come off. So I don't know what DC Collectibles did that made their figures very undurable over the years. Maybe they weren't built to last, but this is looking like it's becoming more of a widespread issue than initially conceived. And I, take my word of caution here. Be careful with your figure if you're taking it back off the shelf or out of the box and playing with them, because it looks like there might be doom waiting for you. With that said, let's at least tread lightly and tackle the articulation. As every other figure in the DC Collectibles line, you do have a joint here at the head that allows mostly 360 degrees. It starts to get a little stiff there, but of course I'm not going to try to force it. And he can pivot it slightly up and down, ever so much like that. You do have a nice, rather flexible ab crunch right there. It's in the form of a hinge, but it's actually very, very movable and flexible. You do have a joint at the waist that allows movement very freely, actually. You just got to be careful with the rubber piece here of the utility belt, but other than that, it actually does a very good job at trying to illustrate movement there. You do have leg joints where you have this division here that allows opening of the legs about that far. Doesn't really move inwards all too much, but you can move it forward about that. It does have a slight diagonal thing going on here at the top, so you do notice that the leg is starting to kind of move outwards as I'm moving it upwards, and then it moves about that far back. Of course, be mindful of this cutout here that kind of ruins the illusion. And then you do have joints at the knee, 2 joints to be specific, and you can bend about that far. Of course, be careful with that knee pad piece right there, because it looks like it's held together by a simple adhesive there at the top of the joint. So being that we just clarified everything that went down with this elbow joint, be careful and again tread lightly. You do have a ball joint at the ankle that allows movement of the foot about that far back, that much forward. Some slight pivoting to the, actually there's no pivoting, but you could horizontally rotate it 360 degrees. and kind of move it about like that for positioning. But as I mentioned at the top of this video, it has loosened over the years, so just, you know, kind of be careful with that if yours is in the same position. And then moving on to the left arm, like I said, all the articulation here could be found over here, but I'm not gonna, you know, mess with that. But you do have the shoulder joint that allows movement about that much outwards, and mainly movement up, although it's a little hindered there by the cape piece right there. But you can move it up about that far, move it back about that much, and then the bend at the elbow. Only at a 90 degree, there's only one joint, one simple ball joint right there, and the gauntlet does restrict the movements just a tad, and you do have a swivel at the wrist. Now, unfortunately, this was the only Arkham Origins figure that I own, and I'm happy that at least I made it Batman out of all characters to have it be the only one in my collection from Arkham Origins. However, I recently changed that by adding a new character from Arkham Origins, only this time it wasn't from so much DC Collectibles as it was from McFarlane Toys. So let me get this guy out of the way and bring in McFarlane Toys Deathstroke. And here's the thing, he can definitely hold his own review, because considering that so far this is the only thing that McFarlane has put out for Arkham Origins, holy shit, it is quite an effort, because this is honestly one of my favorite McFarlanes so far. There is something just about the sculpting and the texturing. I know I always go off about sculpt and texture, but they got it down, mother and pat here with Deathstroke, as far as just everything that's going around with his armor, the chest area, the distinguishment between the shoulder pads on one side to the other, the color plating. I mean, it's Deathstroke. It's nevertheless Deathstroke. It's an action figure and yet a statue all in one in the 7-inch format. You could probably argue it's about 6.75 or so, but with the added accessory here at the back, you can probably say it stretches out to 7 inches. And nonetheless, like you can tell right here, the detail is just rather immaculate, and McFarlane has kind of outdone themselves again. Now, it's been a while since I've actually played the Arkham Origins game, and I wouldn't be opposed to revisiting it very, very soon, but from what I remember, this is actually one of the more accurate representations of Deathstroke. And I've said in videos past, whenever I've covered McFarlane Toys before, that they always do a little something to kind of give it their own unique characteristic and distinguish it from the actual representation or render that you will end up with in the movie or in the game or whatever it is that they're tackling. Here, I don't see anything that stands out to me very blatantly. Everything just looks very across the board accurate to how I remember seeing him in that very iconic boss battle from Arkham Origins. And so far, everything is to scale, everything is sculpted really well. You of course got the patches and the utility belt, the combination of the very muted blue with the reflective orange, a little bit of scaling silver going around the elbows and the obliques, the shoulder pads again, and then that mask. Of course, you know, you're only going to have the one eye to use as a reference as far as how the paint job comes across for his human qualities. That's quite literally the only human thing that he's got going. But in terms of actual, again, sculpting and detail and the actual representation of Deathstroke, it's all there. I don't know what it is, but the actual touch of the matte finish on this blue side of his mask feels really, really good. And then waiting here in the back is a little piece of, I don't know what this material is called. I don't want to say rubber. It's kind of like that foamy, very rigid foam, but his little characteristic here to distinguish him as the ninja assassin that he is. Of course, more details that you have a little bomb right here and the patches on the side, as well as the pistol that unfortunately does not come out. This is actually just part of the dressing for the figure itself. Would have been nice to have had that as a separate accessory, because unfortunately Deathstroke, as cool as he looks, he only comes with one accessory that came separated right out of the box, and that is his katana back here. However, they did something kind of clever. I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but let me show it off ever so slightly real quick, because I love this thing. I really love this thing. As you can see, the sheath actually comes off. You have some really modest detailing going across right here on the sheath itself, but when you flip it, you'll notice that the sheath is actually cut in half to fit the sword. It's a little bit of a compromise they made, but you'll notice you have a peg there to then fit on the back side of the figure itself. You have the peg right there that it fits snugly in there, but even a slot to fit the sheath right in there, so everything is just compartmentalized and tight and it never goes anywhere. You don't run the risk of it coming off and getting lost or anything like that. So it stays on the figure, and then of course removing the blade from the sheath, you have to kind of give it a quick tug here to come across here, and there you have Deathstroke's famous katana. The blade itself is pretty good. It's nothing too crazy. It does come a little warped. You can kind of see right there that it's has a tendency to go a little bit to one side over the other, so a little bit of pressure is probably going to be needed to straighten it out. Otherwise, it is made out of rubber, but the pointy is actually rather durable. And then you have the hilt, which is cut along very well. Nothing crazy as far as detailings, you know, there's nothing very microscopic or anything like that that's referencing anything else in the Batman universe, but it does the job of selling the imagery of it being a katana. And unlike some past McFarlane figures that I've been toying around with, this one actually does a good job at fitting into Deathstroke's hand for posabilities. It's only here where there is a word of caution that you are gonna have to do a little bit of flexing here and there, because it's tough to get in one hand. One hand is more molded to fit a sword than the other. In fact, this hand you would think would be the sword hand, only to then realize that the hand that looks like it would have originally been done to hold a gun, again, the gun over here, the pistol on his side arm, his side holster, does not come off, and yet this hand is clearly molded to fit a pistol of some kind inside. He's even got the trigger finger insinuated forward. So I was wondering, like, was that the original plan, or maybe they scrapped an accessory of some kind and maybe this was supposed to be a separate piece? I don't know what happened there. I don't know if McFarlane ran out of time. I don't know if the pandemic was any kind of factor into this, but what I've noticed is that ironically, it's what looks like would have been a gun-toting hand to be the more accessible one towards fitting the sword itself. You just kind of have to flex a little bit the 3 remaining fingers and the thumb to get it to ever so slightly fit. And you're just going to have to give it some careful pressing, because again, you don't want to risk damaging the figure. And once you get the bottom of the hilt kind of pressed forward, the rest just kind of slides a little easily, as you can see right there. Boom, ready to go and take on Batman in that awesome quick time event boss fight. No, honestly, the boss fight itself is awesome. It's just that it does have its, you know, moments of QTEs that, you know, could be argued, could be argued and debated across the board. But overall, let's all agree that Arkham Origins needs some more love. When are we getting that port? Now on to the segment that has never let me down in regards to McFarlane Toys. Articulation. Keeping in line with their slogan, 22 moving parts. Deathstroke is no exception, and considering just the build quality of the suit and the, again, accuracy, the molding, the sculpting, all that stuff, it just feels good to move some of these ratcheted joints apart. It's awesome for the posability. And it's pretty much similar to others, except, again, the robustness of the armor is what makes it look so cool. He's so cool. But you do have the ball joint here at the top of the head that allows posability and rotation full 360 degrees. Gets a little hampered when you move it towards the back, and of course you do have to move the little bandana piece, but you can. It does feel like there's a double joint in there. I can't accurately call on that. I just know that he can pivot his head up and down about that far, and he's got a slight little incline to be able to shift his neckline forward and inward and backward, just slightly. It's very hard to come across on camera, but it feels like it's in there. No exact torso or ab crunches that I can really call upon, but there is a waist joint that you can kind of slightly edge from side to side, and it is ratcheted that not only allows mobility horizontally, but you can also bend at the oblique for horizontal movements such as that. And then, as you can see right there, let's go ahead and call it. The leg articulation is ratcheted at the top of the leg right there. That allows mobility. It's a little stifled going forward, admittingly. It's probably because of this utility piece right here, the utility belt. But when you move it back, it's actually when it gets a little bit more flexible, as well as outwards about that. Oh, actually, no, we could push it about that high up. And it's ratcheted, so it does stay in place rather well. And actually a little bit more inwards than you would like. No thigh swivels, but you do have the casual bending of the knee right there, about that far back. Not much going forward, but you do have 2 joints to help out with that, 2 ratcheted joints. And then moving down, you do have an ankle joint that allows pivoting downwards, upwards only about that much, and slight pivoting to the left and to the right. Of course, can't forget the toesies. They do bend right about there, as you can see. Kind of funny that he's got the thicker feet considering the armor revolving around his uniform and his suit and even his boots here, to see that there's so much flexibility on his toes like that, you know? A regular human being can barely even move in shoes like this or boots like this. But nevertheless, going back up to the arms, you got what I've always loved, which is of course the double joint going on in the shoulder, the inner piece right there that allows movement of the shrugging kind of motion or shrugging variety. Although this is probably the only area where the armor does become a little bit of a happenstance, or a hindrance rather, where especially this piece that's meant to have like these shell casings, it does kind of limit a little bit of what you can do with that shoulder piece. Like moving the arm up, it's ratcheted, so you cannot, but there's more resistance. So pushing it upwards, you actually have to be a little bit more forceful, but not too much. You don't want to risk damaging the figure, and you can rotate the arm 360 degrees in place like that. Just be careful again with the pieces around there. They are made out of rubber, but they're still a little hardened enough that they could potentially break, so just be careful with that. And they are ratcheted, so you do have two joints right there to kind of allow different shoulder mobility. I just know that it's a little bit more flexible on the other piece without much going on in the form of plastic shell piecing. That makes it, as you can see, just a little bit more viable to movement such as that. But you do feel the extra shoulder piece in there that I've always dug about McFarlane thus far. Double joints at the elbow, so you can fully bend at the elbow, increase it all the way across like that. And then, of course, that ball joint at the wrist of each hand for 360 degrees, as well as an incline joint that allows to bend the wrist about, it's a little bit more on the vertical stance with this other hand, but you can see that's kind of moving inwards and outwards like so. And for a very quick comparison, here we have Deathstroke next to the pre-mentioned Arkham Origins Batman from DC Collectibles. I understand that they're completely different companies, they're completely different takes and aesthetics going on, but what I find kind of interesting is that even though that is the case, a little bit of that scaling is actually kind of proportionate. I mean, Deathstroke does look like he topples over Batman in terms of beefiness and stockiness, but in terms of height, I want to say this is kind of close to about what we ended up with in that boss battle during the game. So it looks like they're still somewhat to scale and look relatively good next to each other. I recognize that they are in completely different ballparks. One is made by McFarlane and the other by DC Collectibles, but they do come from the same property, the same game, Arkham Origins, one that should probably get a little bit more respect. As I mentioned before, it is the underdog of the series and it has its own merits, and I feel like both companies here were able to bring something to the table to kind of showcase that a little bit more in figure form, whether it be with the sculpting and the actual build of Arkham Origins Batman here from DC Collectibles, despite the joint issues over the years literally coming apart and causing some frustration here, or the actual meticulous texturing and articulation from McFarlane's with Deathstroke, making one of my favorite figures amongst the collection, at least from them, that I have attained. More accessories would have been appreciated, but as it stands, these are actually quite fascinating figures to give, like I said, more recognition over to Arkham Origins. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you guys do own these figures. If you want to get your own McFarlane Toys Deathstroke, there's an affiliate link in the description. If you guys want to use it, that will help out the channel and I would appreciate it. In the meantime though, thank you guys for watching once again, and as always, stay humble.